Have you ever pondered the depths of human cruelty? A man-made famine, the Holodomor, orchestrated by Joseph Stalin, resulted in millions of deaths. Let's explore this dark chapter of history. In the early 1930s, Stalin's Soviet regime unleashed an unprecedented wave of horror upon the people of Ukraine. This was the Holodomor, a famine of catastrophic proportions, a deliberate act of genocide that claimed the lives of millions. Let's explore this dark chapter of history. What drove a government to starve its own people? What depths of human cruelty were plumbed during this grim period? Stalin's regime was marked by a ruthless pursuit of power, an iron fist that crushed dissent, and policies that brought about widespread suffering. The Holodomor stands as a stark testament to the extent of this cruelty, a chilling reminder of the horrors that can be perpetrated by those in power. This video will walk you through the events leading up to, during, and after the Holodomor. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video for more content like this. To comprehend the Holodomor, we must first understand the events leading up to it. Let's take a step back to the late 20s, specifically between 1928 and 1932, a period marked by the first five-year plan. This ambitious initiative was introduced by Joseph Stalin with the goal of rapidly industrializing the largely agrarian Soviet Union. Soviet Ukraine, known as the breadbasket of Europe, was a key player in this plan. Ukraine's fertile lands were seen as the fuel that would drive the Industrial Revolution in the Soviet Union. But this progress came at a terrible cost. The plan necessitated the forced collectivization of agriculture, a policy that upended the lives of millions of peasants. To achieve this, the government targeted the kulaks, or wealthy peasants. These were the individuals who owned larger farms or employed workers. They were seen as a threat to the communist ideal of a classless society. Thus began a relentless campaign of dekulakization, involving the seizure of land and property, forced labor, and in many cases deportation and even execution. But the kulaks didn't submit quietly. They resisted, often by sabotaging their own crops and livestock, rather than handing them over to the state. This act of defiance, however, only served to exacerbate the already brewing food crisis. Meanwhile, the average Ukrainian peasant, caught in the crossfire between the state and the kulaks, bore the brunt of this upheaval. Stripped of their land and livelihood, they were herded into collective farms, where they worked under harsh conditions for meager rations. It was a grim precursor to the horrors that lay ahead. These events, the first five-year plan, the forced collectivization, the resistance of the kulaks, all culminated in a volatile situation, a situation that was ripe for disaster. And disaster did come in the form of a man-made famine, a famine that would claim millions of lives and leave a permanent scar on the history of Ukraine. These events set the stage for what was to come, a disaster of unimaginable proportions. 1932 marked the beginning of the Holodomor, a period of mass starvation and despair. This wasn't a famine brought about by drought or blight, but a man-made disaster, orchestrated under the iron fist of Joseph Stalin's Soviet regime. The Soviet government, in a bid to rapidly industrialize the country, implemented a policy of forced collectivization of agriculture. This meant that small, privately owned farms were seized and combined into large, state-controlled collective farms. The farmers, or kulaks, as they were derogatorily called, were perceived as a threat to the communist vision, and thus became a target. The state began a brutal campaign of requisition, seizing not just grain but all kinds of foodstuffs, from potatoes to livestock. This was done under the pretext of feeding the urban population and exporting grain to finance industrial projects. The quotas set by the authorities were impossible to meet, and often, the grain that was harvested was seized entirely, leaving the rural population with virtually nothing to eat. This ruthless requisition left the Ukrainian countryside in a state of utter destitution. The farmers who had once been the breadbasket of Europe were now unable to feed even themselves. They watched in helpless despair as their larders were emptied, their livestock taken away, and their children began to starve. The authorities turned a blind eye to the suffering. Reports of mass starvation were suppressed, and international aid was refused. The state propaganda machine continued to churn out tales of bumper harvests and prosperous collective farms, even as millions starved. As the winter of 1932 set in, the situation turned from bad to worse. With no food and little hope, the people of Ukraine were plunged into a winter of unprecedented suffering and despair. Entire villages were wiped out, families perished together, and the land was left barren and lifeless. This was no natural disaster, but a calculated act of a brutal regime. The Holodomor was a famine by decree, a heartless act of political violence against a people who were seen as a threat to the Soviet state, a chilling testament to the lengths a regime would go to in order to consolidate its power and control. In 1933, the famine reached its peak, with deaths in Ukraine estimated to be between 7 to 10 million. The Holodomor, a man-made disaster, had reached its most devastating stage. The fields of Ukraine, once referred to as the breadbasket of Europe, lay barren and desolate. The people who had once thrived in these lands were now succumbing to unprecedented levels of starvation and despair. The extent of the famine was unimaginable. Communities were decimated, families torn apart, and entire generations lost. The once bustling streets were now lined with the bodies of those who had succumbed to starvation. The chilling silence was only broken by the mournful cries of those left behind, struggling to survive amidst the ruins of their lives. While the Ukrainian people were suffering, the Soviet government vehemently denied the existence of the famine. In fact, they went to great lengths to suppress any information about the Holodomor. They enacted harsh penalties for anyone found to be spreading rumors of the famine, effectively sealing off Ukraine from the outside world. Ironically, as the Ukrainian people starved, the Soviet Union continued to export grain to other countries. The government's propaganda machine painted a picture of a prosperous and thriving Soviet Union, a stark contrast to the grim reality faced by the Ukrainian people. The Soviet government's denial and suppression were so effective that the international community remained largely oblivious to the crisis. The world was focused on the Great Depression and the struggles of their own nations. This allowed the Soviet government to continue its policies unchallenged, exacerbating the suffering of the Ukrainian people. As the death toll rose, the Ukrainian people clung to hope and their indomitable spirit. They shared what little they had and helped each other in whatever way they could. They continued to resist and survive, refusing to be broken by the hardships they faced. The world was largely unaware of the horrors unfolding in Soviet Ukraine. The Holodomor ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a nation scarred and millions dead. The year was 1933. Ukraine, once a fertile land, was now a barren wasteland. The man-made famine had ended, but the aftermath was almost as devastating as the famine itself. The people of Ukraine were left reeling, trying to rebuild their lives amidst the loss and trauma. As the snows of the harsh winter began to thaw, the extent of the tragedy became all too apparent. The once bustling villages were now eerily silent, the fields left untended. Families had been torn apart, with millions of lives lost to starvation. The survivors were left with deep psychological scars, their trust in humanity shattered. The effects of the Holodomor were not confined to the immediate aftermath. The famine had a profound impact on Ukraine's demographic structure, with the loss of a significant portion of the population. The agricultural sector, once the pride of Ukraine, was decimated, leading to long-term economic repercussions. But it was not just the physical and economic damage that was significant. The Holodomor also left an indelible mark on the national psyche. The trauma of the famine was passed down from generation to generation, shaping the collective memory of the Ukrainian people. In the years that followed, Ukraine and other countries began to recognize the Holodomor for what it was, a genocide. This recognition was not just about acknowledging the past, but also about ensuring that such atrocities are not repeated in the future. Today, the Holodomor is commemorated with a day of remembrance, a moment to reflect on the lives lost and the resilience of the survivors. It's a testament to the spirit of the Ukrainian people, a spirit that refuses to be broken, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. As we delve into the pages of history, it's crucial to remember the lessons learned from events like the Holodomor. It's a stark reminder of the power of propaganda, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the devastating effects of policies driven by ideology rather than humanity. The Holodomor remains a grim reminder of the lengths to which human cruelty can extend. The Holodomor, a man-made famine, is a stark chapter in human history that we must never forget. It's a testament to the depths of human cruelty, a sobering reminder of how unchecked power can lead to unimaginable suffering. The Holodomor, engineered by Joseph Stalin in the early 1930s, led to the death of millions in Soviet Ukraine. From the prelude to the horrifying peak and the aftermath that followed, Each segment of this story serves as a grim lesson for us all. In this journey through history, we've explored the harsh realities of the Holodomor, a tragic event that has left indelible scars on the fabric of humanity. It is crucial that we remember and reflect on such events, not just to honor the millions who perished, but also to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. In remembering the Holodomor, we honor the millions who perished and remind ourselves of the horrors that can arise from unchecked power. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video for more historical insights. As we conclude this exploration of the Holodomor, we invite you to delve deeper into this topic. There is a wealth of knowledge out there waiting to be discovered, and each piece of information helps paint a fuller picture of this harrowing time in history. History, as they say, is written by the victors. But it's essential to remember that there are always multiple perspectives to every event. The Holodomor is a prime example of this, with different viewpoints leading to varying interpretations. To truly understand history, we must be willing to look beyond what's presented to us and seek out these different perspectives. There are countless resources available to you if you wish to learn more about the Holodomor. Books and academic articles provide in-depth analyses and personal accounts of the famine. Documentaries and films offer visual representations and narratives that can help bring the events to life. Museums, both physical and virtual, house artifacts and exhibits that provide tangible connections to the past. But perhaps the most valuable resource is discussion. Engaging in conversations about historical events like the Holodomor, asking questions and sharing insights can lead to a deeper understanding and appreciation of history. It's through these discussions that we can challenge our preconceptions, broaden our perspectives, and ensure that the lessons of history are not forgotten. As we move forward, let us remember the importance of history in shaping our present and future. The Holodomor, though a dark and tragic event, serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and the devastating effects of government policies on ordinary citizens. So let's keep the curiosity alive. Let's continue to question, to learn, and to understand. Let's make a commitment to remember the past, to honor the memory of those who suffered, and to strive for a world where such atrocities are a thing of the past. Join us in our next video as we continue to unravel history's most intriguing and sobering events. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video to stay updated.